Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask unanimous consent that we could introduce into the record a letter from the the Association of General Contractors of America and their concern for the infrastructure and modernization of our regulatory reform.
Hearing no objections, ordered.
Thank you very much. Mayor Mitchell, we have in West Virginia over 200 brownfield sites, and there's 60 in my district. I've got one in a building immediately adjacent to my office in Wheeling, so I'm quite familiar with some of the problems with it. And I would agree from your testimony, the concern that it's a blight in your community to have one. We've had over the last 6 years since I've been in Congress a lot of discussion about that, about how we can motivate that from happening. But what are you suggesting we do so that we can move this along through the process? Because we know, like the one you were referring to is 15 or 20 years. I know the site that I'm referring to is 30 or 40 years has been abandoned, and it's right on the riverfront. So what do we do about addressing the bureaucratic inefficiencies and delays and judicial delays? What would you suggest we do on brownfields?
Well, so putting funding, additional funding aside, I think there are a couple of things. So one is increasing the flexibility of the use of grants. So there are many communities, I suspect Wheeling is like New Bedford in this way, an older manufacturing city, that have many brownfield sites, and money is, grants are issued to cities that, like mine and yours, with the qualification, with fewer restrictions. In other words, the money wouldn't be site-specific, but would be city-specific, and so that we might be able to use them on different sites depending how the market shifts. Because we don't want a site. Here's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid a situation where we go through the process of applying for a brownfield grant, getting the grant, and then the developer says, we're not interested anyway, right? And so then the city, have to start over again and reapply for another site through EPA's grant cycle to address somewhere else that might be developable. So that's one. The other thing is, I think that the treatment under CERCLA of municipal ownership of sites, I think would matter. I mean, if cities had the ability to take control of sites and to do planning and do environmental assessment and could, through those efforts, incite the market, we would be in a better place. Now, one might say, well, so wherein lies the accountability?
I hope we can have further conversation. I'd like to go beyond those two on a thing, because I want to get in my time frame down to Mr. Sunday. You had referenced in your prepared testimony about 321A, the Clean Air Act, and you said that because in the language of the statute, there is a language that says continued evaluation. The EPA is to conduct, quote, continued evaluation of potential loss of employment that may result from administration or enforcement of the act, close quote. And you expressed some concern that that's not being upheld. A federal judge in October confirmed that it is not being upheld. And you said in your paper that Congress should do something. What are you suggesting we do?
Well, I appreciate the question, sir. The language of that opinion was, I think, a pretty strong uprating of the agency. I believe Congress should step in, and maybe there's administrative penalties, maybe there's some sort of sanctions against the agency if they're not done. At the very least, there should be some sort of oversight. It's important that the continued evaluation happens, one, because Congress said it should, and I think we should have respect for the rule of law when Congress issues a directive to the agency, that the agency carries that out. And second, we need to consider that there are substantial public health impacts on an individual who loses their job. I referenced that in my testimony, that we don't fully account for the lifetime loss of earnings or the declining quality of life for somebody that loses their job.
Yes, thank you. I found it incredible when I read the testimony that the EPA recognized that they were just not going to do it. Just not going to do it, even though it was a statute. So I'm questioning, how about any of the others? Mr. Sullivan, would you agree that this is a problem when the EPA chooses to enforce some portions of law and not others?
Congressman, I think it's a huge problem, and in particular, there are instances where EPA is supposed to consult with small business prior to finalizing a proposed rule, and it does not. I'll give you one example. In the risk management plan that this subcommittee has jurisdiction over in the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency submitted their rule to the Office of Management and Budget before the panel report that summarizes small business input was even finished. That's an example of the agency going through a check-the-box exercise versus what Congress's intent was, a constructive dialogue for solutions. And I think that this subcommittee is well situated to bring some oversight to make sure that that doesn't continue.
I'm sorry, my time's expired.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair now recognizes